The folder lay between us at the settlement table when my husband said he wanted the house, the business, and a clean divorce. Still, I smoothed the edge of that folder with my thumb, keeping my voice steady while the man I trusted spoke like everything was already his. As the paper shifted softly beneath my hand, I remembered how often my partner told me I didn't understand money or control. While the folder stayed closed, it dawned on me that every claim the man who betrayed me made had already been answered in ink. The same thin stack held what my husband signed away long before he chose someone else. That's when I decided not to argue at all, because the moment he opened it, the truth would take everything back quietly. Before we start, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. If you enjoy the story, please hit like, subscribe, and join our community. It really helps us grow. The night Daniel raised his glass and said, "To my company, my house, my success." Not one person at that table knew my name was on every document he was bragging about. The restaurant was dim and polished, the kind of place where the lighting softened faces and the prices demanded respect. Cutlery clinked quietly. Red wine and truffle oil hung in the air. Daniel loved it here. Places like this made him feel important. We were hosting his clients, and Madison, the interior designer he'd recently started praising like a secret weapon. He introduced her with his hand at her back. "She's a star," he said. "She's taking our work to the next level." Madison smiled, confident and glossy. Her perfume was floral and clean, not something I wore. "Daniel's vision is incredible," she said, looking at him, not me. Daniel barely touched his menu before launching into stories. "When I built this company from nothing," he said, leaning back, "I knew it would take sacrifice." The clients nodded. Madison leaned closer, eyes bright. I sat still, hands folded, listening to a story I knew wasn't whole. When the conversation shifted to budgets, I spoke carefully. "If the project starts that fast, we might want to protect early cash flow." Daniel cut me off without even looking at me. "Madison had a great idea about the kitchens," he said. "Tell them." No one asked me to continue. I pressed my lips together and nodded along while Madison talked finishes and lighting. The bread felt rough under my fingers. Later, someone asked how he got started. "We went all in," Daniel said. "I took the risk." "My grandmother's inheritance helped at the beginning," I added softly. "It covered equipment and—" He laughed. "Julia likes to think her little nest egg built an empire," he said. "But let's be honest, it was mostly me." The table laughed, not cruelly, just enough. My face burned. Under the table, I reached for his hand. He pulled away to gesture while he talked. My fingers closed around nothing. When I mentioned a budgeting safeguard, he waved it off. "She handles grocery spreadsheets," he said. "I handle the real money." Madison smirked. The server poured more wine. My stomach tightened. Then Daniel started talking about our house. "My place in Maple Ridge," he said proudly. I thought of the trust binder in my home office, the one with my name on it, the one no one ever asked about. I smiled anyway. When he raised his glass, everyone followed. "To my company, my house, my success." Glass clinked. The wine tasted bitter. On the drive home, streetlights flashed across his face. "That comment hurt," I said quietly. He sighed. "Why do you always make things about you?" I was joking. I need to look strong in front of clients. Strong. Like I made him weak. At home, he fell asleep quickly. I waited, then walked into my office and pulled the binder from the shelf. Reeves Family Trust. Trustee, Julia Reeves. In the dark window, my reflection looked like someone living inside a life she owned but didn't control. Now I know this. Being underestimated can feel like erasure, but sometimes it's just the calm before being seen. When his phone started buzzing after midnight with project emergencies, Daniel rolled onto his side, kissed my forehead and whispered, "I'm doing this for us." The screen lit his face blue as he read, already halfway out of bed. I lay there listening to the ceiling fan tick, telling myself love sometimes sounded like inconvenience and smelled like coffee and deadlines, but when he leaned down to kiss me again, the scent on his shirt didn't belong to our house. It was floral, light, and expensive. Not my soap, not my shampoo. I told myself it came from a job site, a client's hug, a crowded room. I stacked small excuses carefully because the bigger thought felt too heavy to lift. Weeks slipped by like that. Daniel spent more nights at the office or meeting clients at a downtown hotel bar he mentioned casually, like it was part of his job description. The house grew quiet. My evenings collapsed into the glow of my laptop while invoices stacked beside me. The dishwasher hummed. The fridge clicked. I tracked payments while he tracked miles. One night, the clock flipped past 1 a.m. and the front door finally clicked. His boots scraped the mat. Keys clattered into the bowl. I sat on the couch with the TV low, pretending I dozed off. When he saw me, he froze, surprise flashing across his face before a grin slid into place. "Babe," he said softly. "What are you doing up?" I asked how the meeting went. He yawned, complained about needy clients, then pulled me into a hug. His face turned away, just enough. I still smelled it. Perfume, mixed with his cologne and something sharp underneath. "You smell like perfume," I said. He laughed. "You're imagining things." The bartender sprayed something. "Theme night." The way he said it made me feel silly for noticing, dramatic for caring. He kissed my head and told me to go to bed. He fell asleep fast. I didn't. The next morning, coffee tasted burnt as I logged into our joint account to pay contractors. Charges loaded slowly, then lined up neatly on the screen. Bar, restaurant, room service, all from the same boutique hotel. My chest tightened as dates matched nights he'd said he was elsewhere. When I mentioned it, he sighed like I was exhausting him. "Client dinners go long," he said. "You should trust me instead of cross-examining me." The word stung. Asking became accusing. Numbers became paranoia. A week later, Hannah met me for coffee. She noticed my dark circles immediately. "Is his hustle worth it?" she asked. I joked that at least we'd own everything someday. She looked at me carefully and said, "You already do, Jules. Don't forget it." I laughed it off, but the sentence stayed. That night, Daniel didn't come home. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his cologne lingering on the pillow beside me. I told myself he was stressed, not cheating. The other explanation felt too big to name. Today I understand that denial isn't calm. It's fear pretending to be patience. The first time Daniel called me Mads in a text, I told myself it was autocorrect. One of those tiny mistakes phones made when you typed too fast and didn't care enough to check. I was in my home office on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of quiet where you could hear every little thing. The soft clack of my keyboard, the faint whir of the printer warming up. Coffee sat beside my laptop, gone lukewarm, smelling nutty and bitter. Sunlight cut through the blinds in pale stripes across my desk, turning dust into tiny floating sparks. My phone buzzed. "Daniel, can't stop thinking about last night. Same place Friday? D." My stomach flipped so hard it felt like I'd missed a step on the stairs. Last night, Daniel had come home late and fallen asleep without even asking how my day was. We hadn't gone anywhere. We hadn't done anything worth "can't stop thinking" about. I stared at the message like it might rearrange itself into something innocent. I checked the top of the screen. To Julia. Another buzz hit before I could breathe. Daniel. "Sorry, wrong person." Then another, almost immediately, like he was trying to smother the first one with speed. Daniel. "Client stuff." Ignore. The sequence was too fast, too practiced. My skin prickled along my arms, that cold warning feeling you get right before you touch something hot. I could hear the blood in my ears louder than the little office sounds. I scrolled up our thread. Most of it looked normal. Groceries, call me when you can, reminders about invoices, his occasional "love you" that always came when he needed something. And then, like a stain you didn't notice until the light hit it right, there was an image sitting in the middle of our chat that didn't belong. A low-lit bar table. 2 cocktails sweating in short glasses. and a hand with red polished nails reaching toward the edge of the frame, toward where Daniel's hand must have been. The caption under it read, "Already miss you, M." My throat tightened. I held the phone closer, as if distance could change what I was seeing. Red nails, the kind of red that screamed confidence, the kind I never wore because Daniel once told me it looked too aggressive. He'd meant to send that to someone else, and somehow my name had caught the bullet. I didn't cry. Not yet. I sat perfectly still at my desk, staring at that picture until my coffee smell turned sour and my stomach started to roll. Then I screenshot everything. His message, the wrong person, the photo, because something in me finally understood that memory wasn't enough when you were being told you were crazy. That night, Daniel came in like nothing happened, tossing his keys down, shoulders loose, acting like our life was still his stage. The house smelled like dish soap and the candle I'd lit out of habit. I met him in the kitchen with my phone already unlocked. "What is this?" I asked, and held it out. His eyes flicked to the screen. For a split second, his face hardened, pure panic, before it snapped into anger. "You're going through my messages?" he barked, like that was the crime. "I didn't go through anything," I said. "You sent it to me." He snatched the phone from my hand and started tapping fast. Delete, 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 like he could erase the moment if he moved quickly enough. "You always jump to conclusions," he said. "M is a client. She's helping with interiors. You know how important relationships are in this business." "A client with red nails and bar photos?" My voice shook, but I didn't lower it. He stepped closer, towering just a little, using his body like pressure. "Stop. You're spying. You're looking for reasons to be upset." "I asked why you called me Mads." He scoffed. "Autocorrect. And if you respected my privacy, mistakes like that wouldn't happen." He said it like my hurt feelings were an attack on his freedom. My hands curled into fists at my sides. "So I'm the problem." "You're making it a problem," he snapped, then grabbed his jacket. "I need to cool off. I can't deal with this." The door shut hard enough to rattle the hallway picture frame. His footsteps faded down the driveway. Then the house went quiet again. Too quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone in my lap, thumb hovering over Madison's Instagram profile like it was a ledge I wasn't sure I wanted to step off. When her page loaded, my chest tightened. Smiling job site selfies, tagged photos, and then a shot in the lobby of the boutique hotel Daniel liked. The marble floors and modern chandelier unmistakable. Location tag, our new favorite spot. My hands went cold. This time I screenshot everything, one by one, and emailed it to my private address. In the subject line, I typed, "Just in case I'm not crazy. Today I understand why that sentence mattered. It wasn't proof for him. It was proof for me." When Daniel finally said the words out loud, "I'm in love with someone else. I want a divorce," he did it at our kitchen island. Between a cooling pan of roasted chicken and a stack of unpaid invoices I'd spent all day organizing for him. It was early evening. Golden light poured through the windows, catching dust motes in the air and making everything look softer than it felt. The oven clicked as it cooled, still radiating warmth. I stood at the counter plating dinner, my fingers slick with oil, the smell of rosemary and garlic heavy enough to cling to my clothes. From my home office down the hall, the printer whirred and spat out the final page of his monthly financials. Numbers I'd triple-checked because he liked things clean. Daniel walked in and tossed his keys onto the island harder than necessary. The metal clatter cut through the quiet. "We need to talk," he said. My chest tightened. I braced myself for another lecture about spending, about how I didn't see the big picture, about why his ideas needed more room than our budget allowed. I set the plates down slowly. Instead, he said it all in one breath, like ripping off a bandage. "I'm not happy, Jules. I haven't been for a long time. I'm in love with Madison. I'm leaving." The room tilted. The smell of chicken turned my stomach. I gripped the edge of the counter, the cool stone biting into my palms, just to stay upright. "There's someone else?" I asked, even though I already knew. He rolled his eyes, exasperated. "I just told you, yes." Then his voice softened, almost dreamy. "I finally feel alive with her. She believes in me. She doesn't nitpick every decision." Nitpick. Like noticing hotel charges and lies was some annoying hobby of mine. I stared at him, at the man who couldn't meet my eyes for weeks, but could stand here and narrate his happiness like I was an obstacle he'd finally cleared. He reached into his bag and pulled out a folded packet of papers, already creased like they'd been handled and approved somewhere else. He slid them across the island toward me, right over a smear of olive oil. "I want this to be amicable," he said. "Fair." I didn't touch them. The top page had bullet points, neat and confident. In his version of fair, he kept the house for stability. He kept the business because it's my identity. He offered me what he called a generous amount of support until you get back on your feet. As if I'd been lying down this whole time. I felt a laugh rise and choke itself off in my throat. Tears burned behind my eyes, hot and humiliating. "My inheritance went into both," I said. My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone braver. "You know that." He waved a hand, dismissive. "We're married. What's yours is mine." Then, like he was soothing a child, "Don't worry, I'll take care of you." The words landed wrong, heavy, final, not a promise, an erasure. I looked at the papers again, at how easily he'd decided which parts of our life were his to keep and which parts I was supposed to thank him for returning. He shifted his weight, already restless, already somewhere else. "Please don't make this messy," he added, almost casually. "Madison doesn't deserve drama." That was the moment my vision blurred, not because he was leaving, because he was already protecting her. From me. Like I was the threat. Like my grief was an inconvenience she shouldn't have to witness. I heard myself speak, strangely calm. "I need time to read this." He seemed relieved, like that was the correct answer. He grabbed his bag again, heading for the door. "I'm staying at a friend's tonight," he said. When the door closed behind him, the house felt hollow. The air still smelled like dinner, like a life I'd been maintaining out of habit. I turned off the oven I no longer needed and carried my plate to the sink without taking a bite. Later, I sat at my desk in the quiet glow of my lamp. The printer's last page lay on top of the stack, numbers neat, obedient. Beside it, Daniel's proposed settlement sat thin and smug. I reached up and pulled the trust binder from the shelf. For the first time, I opened them side by side. Today I understand that this wasn't the night I lost my marriage. It was the night I stopped letting him tell me what my life was worth. I expected to find proof of the affair. I didn't expect to find a second mortgage on our house that I had never agreed to. My name scrawled on the signature line in a way that looked like mine, but wasn't. That was the moment the floor truly dropped. The morning after Daniel told me he was leaving, the house smelled like stale tears and burnt coffee. I hadn't slept. Sunlight poured in through the kitchen windows. Too bright, too honest, lighting up every unwashed mug and crumpled receipt on the counter. My head throbbed as I sat at the dining table and pulled the trust binder toward me, its weight familiar and oddly comforting. I flipped through the property schedules slowly, like I was afraid the words might rearrange themselves if I rushed. 2 rental condos, my grandmother's old house, our Maple Ridge home, neatly listed as trust property number 4, black ink, clean lines, my name exactly where it belonged. I opened my laptop and logged into the mortgage portal, just to check the payoff balance Daniel had kept mentioning vaguely, like it was a number that shifted when you looked too closely. The page loaded. I stared at the total. It was wrong. My fingers went cold. I refreshed the page, then scrolled. There it was, another line underneath the primary loan, a home equity line of credit. Active. With a balance I didn't recognize. I didn't remember signing for it because I hadn't. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I clicked through the details, my cursor shaking. I requested the document PDFs, my breath shallow while I waited for them to download. When they opened, my hands trembled as I scrolled. There was Daniel's signature, sloppy and rushed, and beneath it, on a separate line, was mine, or something pretending to be mine. Julia Reeves, written carefully enough to pass at a glance, but wrong if you knew it. The R curled the wrong way. The J was too sharp. It looked like someone copying my name from memory. The date sat at the top of the page, 6 months ago. The same week, Daniel told me not to come to the bank because it would be boring paperwork, and he could handle it faster alone. My stomach dropped. He hadn't just taken out a loan, he'd taken it out against a house the trust technically owned, using my forged consent. I scrolled further, my chest tightening with every line item. Almost $80,000, disbursed in one lump sum. I opened Daniel's separate business account, the one I'd stopped monitoring closely because he'd accused me of micromanaging. The transaction history loaded, and the story spilled out in clean rows of numbers. Transfers to Madison Cole Interiors, LLC. Charges at boutique hotels, jewelry stores, weekend flights. Money bleeding out of a house he didn't legally own, signed away with a name that wasn't his to use. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to slow my breathing. I called Daniel. He answered on the third ring, irritated. What now? My voice shook despite my effort to steady it. Why is there a second mortgage on the house? And why is my signature on documents I never saw? He sighed loudly like I was interrupting something important. I told you we needed cash flow. You forged my name. Oh my God, he said, don't be dramatic. The bank wouldn't move as fast if you came in asking a million questions. I signed for you. What's the big deal? It's all ours anyway. The casualness of it made me dizzy, like he was explaining why he'd borrowed my jacket without asking. That's illegal, I said. And the house is trust property, he snapped. Your trust, my house, our life. You're overreacting. This is exactly the drama I was talking about. Then, sharper, crueler. Madison doesn't make everything an issue. Her name hit like a slap. My ears rang. I hung up without saying goodbye. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at the screen, sunlight washing over the evidence like it didn't care what it illuminated. My hands felt numb as I picked up my phone again and dialed Mark, the trust attorney who'd helped set everything up years ago. His voice was calm when he answered. It changed as I explained. Julia, he said slowly, as trustee, you have the authority to challenge any encumbrance placed on trust property without proper authorization, and forging your signature is a serious criminal matter, especially tied to marital assets. I swallowed. So, I'm not imagining this. No, he said firmly. You have more power here than you realize, and he just handed you leverage. The word leverage settled into me, heavy and strange, not comforting, not exciting, just real. I forwarded every document to Mark, then to Hannah. She responded almost immediately. He is so screwed. Then a second later, also, are you okay? I stared at the message, unsure how to answer. I wasn't okay, but somewhere beneath the grief, beneath the nausea and shock, something else flickered to life. Not revenge, not yet. Clarity. Today I understand that this was the moment everything shifted. I wasn't just the wife he was leaving behind. I was the person holding the paper trail. And Daniel wasn't the only one who knew how to play with documents. Walking into Elaine's office, I felt like a kid called to the principal, clutching my folder like proof I hadn't failed on purpose. The building lobby was quiet and polished, the kind of place where voices softened automatically. When Elaine opened the door and said my name, my stomach tightened, expecting judgment I'd already given myself. Her office smelled like paper and lemon cleaner. Framed degrees lined the wall behind her desk, precise and orderly. Outside the window, traffic hummed steadily, indifferent to my personal crisis. I sat down and placed my folder on my lap, stuffed with copies. The trust documents, the forged loan, screenshots of Daniel's texts, and his so-called amicable settlement. Elaine didn't rush. She flipped through each page slowly, carefully, as if the papers mattered more than the person who'd handed them over. Every so often, her eyebrow twitched at the phrase, "I'll take care of you," at the word fair, at the assumption that Daniel kept the house and business while I walked away grateful. She asked clear surgical questions, dates, titles, who funded what, who signed what. I answered each one, heat crawling up my neck, feeling foolish for how long I'd accepted confusion as normal. Part of me wanted to apologize for not leaving sooner, for not being sharper, louder, harder. She finally looked up. "First," she said, "I'm sorry you're going through this." The words landed gently but firmly. "Second, you are in a far stronger position than you think." I blinked, unsure I'd heard her correctly. Elaine explained it piece by piece. I was the trustee and beneficiary of the trust that held the house and rental properties. My inheritance funded the holding company that owned 70% of Daniel's business. Daniel wasn't the owner he claimed to be. He was a managing member who answered to agreements he'd signed without reading. Then she addressed the loan. Forging my signature wasn't a misunderstanding. It was fraud. Using trust-backed funds to finance an affair counted as dissipation of marital assets. The language was calm, unemotional, devastating in its clarity. My head spun. For years, Daniel had spoken like everything belonged to him by default. Hearing the law describe reality differently felt unreal, like stepping onto solid ground after years of walking on sand. "So, what happens now?" I asked. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. Elaine didn't sugarcoat it. I could challenge the second mortgage. We could push the debt onto Daniel alone. If needed, I could remove him as managing member of the company. I wasn't just the wife he was leaving. I was the primary investor and legal owner of most of what he'd claimed as his identity. The weight of it made me dizzy. I asked if this meant a long, ugly fight. "He will try to make it nasty," she said evenly. "Men like your husband usually do, but the law is the law and paper is paper. Our job is to stay ready and steady." We mapped out a strategy. Don't reveal everything yet. Respond calmly. Assert ownership without emotion. Contest the forged loan with the bank. Collect records. Build a timeline that couldn't be argued away. When I stood to leave, the folder felt different in my hands. Organized. Heavier. Useful. Outside, late afternoon light hit the sidewalk sharply. My phone buzzed with Daniel's name. "Have you calmed down yet? We can still do this nicely." I typed back, "I'm reviewing everything with counsel," then slipped my phone away. Now I understand why that word changed everything. Counsel didn't mean conflict. It meant I wasn't alone anymore. The first time Madison spoke to me, it wasn't to apologize. It was to tell me I was holding Daniel back. She picked the wrong day to underestimate the woman who signs his paychecks. I was leaving the bank with Mark, the trust attorney, my head still buzzing from talk of forged signatures and contested loans. The lobby smelled like polished marble and expensive perfume, the kind meant to signal safety and money. My heels clicked against the floor as the doors slid open and cold air hit my face. That's when a familiar truck rolled up to the curb. Daniel's. The engine idled. The passenger door opened first. Madison stepped out. She wore a fitted blazer and heels that clicked sharply as she straightened, like she was stepping onto a stage. Her hair was smooth, glossy, deliberate. For a second, our eyes met. I saw hesitation flash across her face, just a flicker, before she smoothed it away and walked toward me with a brittle smile. "Julia, right?" she said, tilting her head as if we were distant acquaintances. "Daniel's told me so much about you." I almost laughed. I bet he had. Mark paused beside me, his expression neutral but alert. Madison glanced at him, then back at me, and launched into what was clearly a prepared speech. "I just want you to know I didn't mean for this to happen," she said quickly. "But Daniel deserves to be happy, and with me, it just works. We're aligned." Aligned. The word landed wrong. She kept going, warming to her theme. She talked about growth, about how Daniel felt stifled, about how I was very focused on money and structure and control. She said it gently, like she was diagnosing a problem, not accusing me of anything. My palms stung from the way I was digging my nails into them to stay still. "You're just afraid of change," she added, "and that's okay. Not everyone can handle big vision." There it was, the quiet insult dressed up as concern. When she called me insecure for clinging to the house and dragging out the divorce, something in my chest loosened instead of tightening. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Daniel has plans. Once the business is fully his, we want to expand. New markets, new projects. Maybe buy you out, clean and simple." Buy me out. She believed this because Daniel did. They truly thought I was the obstacle between them and some shiny future, a speed bump they'd roll right over once the paperwork caught up. I looked at her calmly. "Have you seen any of the operating agreements?" I asked. She blinked. "What?" "The business documents," I clarified. "The trust, the LLC agreements." Her smile faltered. "Daniel handles the boring stuff." I nodded slowly. "Then you might not know as much as you think you do." The words were quiet, polite. They landed anyway. Her expression tightened just as Daniel appeared beside her, jaw clenched, eyes sharp. He'd clearly been watching from the truck. "Mads," he snapped, "wait in the car." She hesitated, then turned back to me with a look that mixed pity and smugness, like she thought I just didn't get it. She walked back to the truck, heels clicking again, every step confident. Daniel stepped closer, dropping his voice. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Trying to intimidate her?" I met his eyes. "You're the one who brought her to the bank you forged my signature at." His face flickered, just for a second. Then anger rushed in to cover it. "You're unbelievable," he said. "This is exactly why—" I didn't stay to hear the rest. Mark cleared his throat softly beside me, a reminder that I wasn't imagining any of this, that it was happening in public, in daylight, with witnesses. Daniel turned and stalked back to the truck. As they pulled away, Madison looked back at me through the window. The corner of her mouth lifted like she thought she'd won something. I watched the truck disappear down the street, the sound of the engine fading into traffic. "Enjoy the view while you can, sweetheart. You have no idea what you're sitting in the passenger seat of." In the end, it wasn't the lipstick on his collar that broke me. It was the spreadsheet showing he'd spent more on weekends with Madison than on our entire last year of mortgage payments. I sat in my home office with 2 screens glowing in the dim afternoon light. One showed our joint account. The other showed the business account Daniel liked to call his. The room smelled faintly of dust and old paper, the quiet broken only by the soft whir of my laptop fan. Elaine had suggested I build a clear timeline of suspicious spending. I'd nodded like it was just another task. Numbers usually calmed me. Today, they made my stomach churn. I started sorting transactions by vendor. The boutique hotel popped up again and again, its name repeating like a bad chorus. Bar charges, restaurant charges, room service. Then Madison Cole Interiors, LLC, jewelry stores I didn't recognize. Flights labeled client trip that lined up perfectly with the beach photos on Madison's social media. Bare feet in sand, cocktails held up to the sun, captions about working hard. The amounts climbed quickly. $2,300, $1,450, $4,800. I watched the totals add themselves without emotion, the way software always does. Over a year, it came out to tens of thousands of dollars. On the other side of the screen, I could see our regular expenses. The months Daniel told me we couldn't afford a new washing machine, so I kept coaxing the old one through another cycle. The months he said repairs on my car could wait because cash flow was tight. Tight, apparently, only when it came to our life. My jaw ached from clenching it. I highlighted every expense tied to the affair in neon yellow. The spreadsheet started to look radioactive, bright streaks cutting through rows of gray. It was ugly and undeniable. I printed the statements, the paper warm in my hands, and spread them across my desk like evidence photos. In the margin of one page, I picked up a pen and wrote, "He said we're not made of money." Underneath it, smaller, slower, "We are." He just spent it on her. The words surprised me. They didn't sound angry. They sounded clear. I scanned everything and emailed the annotated spreadsheet to Elaine and Mark. My fingers moved steadily now, no shaking. Elaine replied first. She said the pattern strongly supported a claim of asset dissipation and would matter in both property division and potential reimbursement. Mark followed up, pointing out which charges tied directly to trust-backed funds and could be challenged. Reading their emails, I felt something settle into place. The chaos was starting to organize itself. That evening, Hannah came over with takeout. The smell of fried rice and soy sauce filled the room, grounding and familiar. She kicked off her shoes and leaned over my shoulder, scanning the screen. "Wow," she said softly, then whistled low. "He really built a whole second life." I nodded, eyes still on the numbers. "On your dime," she added, anger flashing across her face. Her outrage steadied me more than comfort ever could. We ate straight from the cartons sitting on the floor because the desk was covered in paper. The glow from my monitor lit the room, reflected in the window like a second, quieter world. For the first time since everything unraveled, I didn't cry while looking at proof of his betrayal. I didn't bargain with myself. I didn't shrink or wonder how I could have been better. I saw what I'd always seen for clients back when I did this professionally, data telling a story. The story was ugly. It was selfish. It was calculated. But it was also evidence. I scrolled to the bottom of the spreadsheet and looked at the final total, the sum of all the little lies. Then I added one last line beneath it, centered and deliberate. "I will not pay for his escape from me." Today I understand why that sentence mattered. It wasn't about revenge. It was about refusing to finance my own erasure. At the settlement conference, Daniel strutted in with his arm around Madison, like this was another room he owned. He smiled at people he didn't know, nodded like a man about to negotiate terms from a position of strength. I watched him from my seat and felt something strangely calm settle in my chest. The mediation room was windowless and harshly lit, fluorescent bulbs buzzing overhead. It smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old carpet. A long table cut the room in half. On one end sat Daniel, his lawyer, and Madison in a crisp white blouse, perched close enough to Daniel that their shoulders touched. She looked around like she belonged there, like this was already her future. On our side sat Elaine, Mark, and me. In front of us were binders, thick, tabbed, orderly, paper with weight. Daniel's lawyer began confidently, outlining their proposal in a smooth, practiced voice. Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms still around Madison. "For continuity," the lawyer said, "Mr. Reeves will retain the marital home." Daniel nodded along. "He will also maintain full ownership of Elliott Design and Build, as it represents his professional identity." Madison squeezed his hand. The lawyer continued, glancing briefly at me. "Ms. Reeves will receive a generous settlement, along with some interest in the rental properties, given that those were family gifts." I stared at the table, tracing the grain of the wood with my eyes, listening to my life be summarized incorrectly. Elaine didn't interrupt. She waited until the lawyer finished, until Daniel's confidence had time to stretch out and get comfortable. Then she opened the Reeves Family Trust binder. Her voice was calm, almost conversational. "Let's clarify the structure," she said. She walked through it slowly, methodically. The trust, funded entirely by my inheritance, holding title to the house and rental properties. Reeves Holdings, LLC, owning 70% of Elliott Design and Build. The managing member clause Daniel signed, acknowledging my role as trustee and majority owner. As she spoke, she slid documents across the table, copies of signatures, his signatures, one from 7 years ago when we bought the house, one from 5 years ago when the business was rolled into the holding company, One from 6 months ago, when he signed loan documents that illegally encumbered trust property. Daniel's lawyer flipped through the pages, his confidence faltering. "I'm going to need a moment," he said. Daniel's face flushed red, then drained. "This isn't right," he muttered. "This was supposed to protect us from taxes, not this." Madison leaned closer, reading over his shoulder. Her manicured finger traced a line on the page. Trustee, Julia Reeves. Her hand slowly slid off his arm. Elaine didn't rush. "Given Ms. Reeves's majority ownership and the trust's control over key assets," she said, "our position is that Mr. Reeves's proposal isn't just unfair, it's legally impossible." She laid out our terms. I retained full control of the house and rentals. I kept my ownership interest in the business. Daniel would receive an equitable portion of remaining liquid assets, reduced by the dissipation he spent on the affair. The second mortgage, fraudulently obtained, was his responsibility alone, either through refinancing in his name or reimbursement. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. "She set me up," he snapped. "This trust is a trick." Mark cleared his throat gently. "Daniel," he said, "you attended the meetings. You initialed every page. The purpose was to protect family assets from exactly this kind of situation." He paused. "You said you trusted your wife." The room went quiet. Madison's voice was barely above a whisper. "You told me you owned everything." Daniel turned to her sharply. "It's the same thing," he hissed. "She's just being vindictive." But the illusion was gone. Madison stared at the documents again, then at Daniel, her confidence cracking. The mediator scribbled notes, eyes flicking between faces, trying to keep neutrality intact. Under the buzzing lights, with paper spread out like evidence, the balance shifted. I felt it. Not triumph, not joy, but a strange sense of alignment. For years, I'd been the quiet infrastructure beneath Daniel's life. Now it was visible, in black and white. When the mediator called a break, Daniel followed me into the hallway, his footsteps sharp behind me. "You humiliated me in there," he said, voice low and furious. I turned and met his eyes. "You left me for her and demanded a divorce," I said evenly. "You just didn't bother to learn who you were divorcing." His mouth opened, then closed. No sound came out. After the settlement meeting, Daniel didn't apologize. He didn't reflect. He went on offense. I found out the way these things always surface, secondhand, sideways, through people who sounded uncomfortable repeating it. Hannah called first, her voice sharp with disbelief. "He's telling everyone you stole his company," she said, "that you trapped him with legal tricks." I closed my eyes and leaned back against the kitchen counter, the cool surface pressing into my spine. Stolen. Trapped. The words felt surreal after weeks of staring at signatures he'd written himself. According to Daniel's new version, the trust had been just for taxes. I'd taken advantage of his trust in me. I'd weaponized paperwork when he'd tried to leave what he was now calling a dead marriage. In his story, he was brave. I was calculating. The affair barely made an appearance. The documents told a simpler story. He signed, he cheated, he forged. But lies move faster than PDFs. A few days later, his mother called. I watched her name light up on my phone and felt that old instinct to brace myself, to prepare to be reasonable. Her voice was tight, carefully controlled. "I don't understand legal things," she said, "but Daniel is devastated. He feels betrayed." Betrayed. I let the word hang there for a moment. She went on gently, like she was asking a favor. "Maybe you could be the bigger person. Give him a fresh start, at least the house. He needs stability." I sat down at the table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. When I spoke, my voice surprised me with how calm it was. "The house was always trust property," I said. "It came from my grandmother. Daniel forged my name on a loan against it, and what I'm offering him now is already more generous than the law requires." The line went quiet, not angry, just stunned. "Oh," she said finally. We ended the call politely. When I set my phone down, my hands weren't shaking. That felt new. Elaine told me not to engage publicly. No posts, no comments, no clarifying statements. Let him talk, she said. Reputations built on lies usually collapse once the truth has an audience. I muted words instead of responding to them. It felt unnatural at first, like not flinching when something came flying at your face. But I trusted her. Paper had weight. Noise didn't. The truth found its way out anyway. A mutual friend messaged me late one afternoon, hesitant but clearly upset on my behalf. She worked with several of Daniel's suppliers. He tried to get sympathy from one of them, she wrote, showed them parts of the filings. My stomach tightened. He didn't realize we'd already seen the full trust documents, she continued. He left out the affair and the forgery. It didn't land the way he thought. I stared at the message for a long moment. For the first time, I saw the smear campaign from the outside, not as something I needed to fix, but as something unraveling under its own weight. At the same time, cracks started appearing where Daniel cared most: his business. Clients began asking careful questions. Vendors wanted written confirmations. Words like ownership dispute made people nervous. Projects slowed. Calls went unanswered longer than they should have. Madison's social media changed too. The glossy site visit photos disappeared. In their place were vague quotes about loyalty and people showing their true colors. The captions sounded defensive, like she was trying to convince herself as much as anyone else. The fairy tale had started fraying. One evening, I sat alone in my living room, the light low, the steady tick of the wall clock marking time. My laptop was open, but not to Daniel's accounts. I hadn't checked them in days. Instead, my spreadsheets were about my future, my expenses, my plans, numbers that belonged to me. The realization came quietly, without drama. I wasn't tracking him anymore. I wasn't reacting. I wasn't shrinking myself to counter his version of events. The shift felt small, and it felt enormous. Now I understand that smear campaigns only work when you're still playing defense. I wasn't. I was building forward, and the paperwork was already doing the talking for me. In court, Daniel tried one last time to play the victim. He sat a little straighter than usual, jaw clenched, eyes tired but defiant, telling anyone who would listen that I was ruining him financially. The judge listened without reacting, then asked a single question that cut through everything else. "Mr. Reeves," he said evenly, "did you or did you not spend marital funds on an extramarital relationship?" The family courtroom was cramped, the air thick with the smell of old wood and disinfectant. The benches creaked when people shifted. Papers whispered every time someone moved a folder. I sat at one table beside Elaine, hands folded in my lap, feeling the hard edge of the chair against my back. Across from us, Daniel sat with his lawyer, shoulders stiff, eyes fixed straight ahead like if he didn't look at me, I couldn't exist. A few observers filled the benches. Friends of friends, curious strangers, people who didn't know us but were about to hear the ugliest parts anyway. Daniel's lawyer stood first. He spoke smoothly, confidently, like this was just another argument he'd rehearsed. He said my trust and equity holdings made me far more secure than Daniel. He said it would be unjust for Daniel to walk away with so little after years of building a business. He described Daniel as a hard-working entrepreneur, blindsided by a complex legal structure he didn't fully understand. I watched Daniel nod along, subtle but eager, like each word restored a piece of his dignity. When Elaine stood, the room seemed to quiet on its own. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue emotionally. She opened a binder and began walking the judge through the facts, one at a time. The trust was created before the marriage. The language was clear. The operating agreement spelled out ownership percentages. Daniel's signatures appeared on every relevant page. The home equity line of credit was taken out without authorization, secured against trust property with my forged signature. Elaine then turned to the spreadsheet. Dates, amounts, vendors, hotels, flights labeled client trips that aligned perfectly with Madison's travel, jewelry purchases, transfers to her company. She read them like coordinates, not accusations. She showed texts and emails placing Daniel in cities he'd told me he was visiting for work. She didn't say he lied. She let the documents do it. When the judge looked at Daniel again and asked about the spending, Daniel shifted in his seat. "It was networking," he said quickly. "Client relationships. That's how business works." Elaine stepped forward and presented a printed email. The paper made a soft slap when she placed it on the bench. The judge read silently. Madison thanking Daniel for the most romantic weekend of her life. The judge's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. His mouth tightened. He set the paper down carefully, like he didn't want it near his hands. He explained dissipation in simple terms, looking directly at Daniel. Using marital funds for non-marital purposes without consent. Using credit secured by trust property without authorization. What that meant for debt allocation, what it justified in division. The language was plain, final. There was no room to argue with definitions. When the order came down, it sounded almost anticlimactic. I retained the house, the rental properties, and my majority stake in the company. Daniel received a smaller portion of remaining accounts and was assigned responsibility for specific debts, including the second mortgage. The judge cited Daniel's breach of financial and marital trust as a factor. No gavel slam, just words that stuck. As we stood to leave, chairs scraped against the floor, people gathered papers. The room exhaled. In the hallway, Daniel leaned toward me, voice low and bitter. "The judge took your side because you're a woman," he muttered. I thought of the binders, the forged signatures, the neon-highlighted spreadsheet, the calm way the truth had been laid out, line by line. "No," I said quietly. He took the side with evidence. Today, I understand that court wasn't about winning or losing. It was about reality finally having a microphone and being believed. After the decree, Daniel marched into the office of Elliott Design and Build like nothing had changed. He pushed through the glass doors with the same swagger, nodding at staff like they still worked for him. What he didn't know, what was already waiting, was the accountant's email sitting in his inbox, copied to me as majority owner, outlining exactly how little authority he actually had left. Weeks had passed since court, and the dust was settling in uneven layers. At the company, everything felt brittle. Vendors called more often, their voices careful. Clients asked pointed questions about continuity. The staff moved quietly, tired of whispers, tired of pretending not to notice the tension that had lived there for months. As majority owner, I scheduled a meeting with the firm's accountant and the lead project manager. Sending the calendar invite felt surreal. For years, I'd worked in the background, approving payments, smoothing cash flow, fixing problems quietly so Daniel could play visionary. Now my name sat in the organizer field, visible and official. We met in the conference room Daniel used to treat like a throne room. The smell of stale coffee clung to the air, mixed with dry erase marker and old carpet. On the whiteboard behind us, someone had erased his favorite slogan, built by Daniel. But faint ghost letters still hovered, like a memory that hadn't fully let go. The accountant opened his laptop and didn't waste time. Cash flow issues caused by overspending, invoices delayed or never sent while Daniel was distracted with his new life, clients late on payments because follow-ups hadn't happened, payroll met, barely, taxes delayed, not catastrophic, but close enough to be dangerous. There's still real potential here, the accountant said carefully. Good projects, solid staff, but it needs management, actual oversight. Not bravado, not charm, not promises made over drinks. The project manager nodded, jaw tight. I recognized the look, relief mixed with exhaustion. Following the operating agreement, Elaine filed the paperwork removing Daniel as managing member. It was procedural, clean, final. He kept a small minority interest, enough to feel like a loss, but no control, no access, no authority. I stepped in as managing trustee representative and appointed the project manager as head of operations, along with a salary bump that made his eyes widen before he caught himself and nodded. "Thank you," he said simply. The room felt lighter. like people could finally exhale. Daniel, of course, did not take it quietly. The calls started first, angry, rambling, alternating between threats and nostalgia. Then emails accusing me of destroying his legacy, of stealing his life's work. One message threatened to sue everyone involved. Elaine replied to each with calm, precise legal language, attaching copies of court orders and agreements Daniel had signed himself. The tone of his messages shifted after that, shorter, more desperate. He stopped threatening lawsuits once it became clear he'd have to fund them himself against paperwork that wasn't on his side. Meanwhile, Madison disappeared from the firm's orbit entirely. Hannah told me she'd stopped taking Daniel's calls. His social media, once polished and confident, filled with vague posts about betrayal and starting over. The comments thinned, the likes slowed. Clients began requesting written assurances that Daniel was no longer handling their money. I signed them without ceremony. Each signature felt steady, grounded. One evening, I walked through the workshop alone. The smell of sawdust and fresh paint hung in the air. Somewhere, a sander hummed steadily, the sound rhythmic and patient. The light was softer here, filtered through high windows dusted with grime and effort. For the first time, no one looked over my shoulder expecting Daniel to appear. No one paused mid-sentence to see if he approved. One of the crew wiped his hands on his jeans and asked, "What do you want to do with this space?" The question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth, then closed it. For years, my role had been to support someone else's vision, quietly, efficiently, without claiming it. Now they were asking me. I looked around at the half-finished work, the potential humming under the surface, and felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Ownership. I took a breath, and then I answered. Daniel once boasted that if he ever left, he'd walk away with everything that mattered. He said it like a threat and a promise at the same time. In the end, he left with a leased car, a pile of debt, and a story even he didn't seem to fully believe anymore. Months passed. The sharp edge of gossip dulled, replaced by the steady noise of new projects and ordinary problems. Life moved on the way it always does, indifferent, forward. From a distance, I watched Daniel's unraveling not as a spectacle, but as a slow series of adjustments he never seemed prepared to make. He moved into a smaller apartment on a busy street where traffic never fully slept, the kind of place where sirens cut through the night and windows rattled when trucks passed. The truck he loved, the one he polished on weekends, the one he used as proof of success, disappeared. Hannah heard he sold it to cover legal fees and overdue bills. In its place appeared a modest sedan, clean but anonymous. No one would look twice. His social media changed tone. The glossy photos of job sites and candlelit dinners with Madison vanished. In their place came vague quotes about resilience and starting over, about learning who's really there for you. Madison was conspicuously absent. Her name stopped appearing anywhere near his. Word traveled quietly that she'd ended things once she realized he couldn't deliver the future he promised. No house, no controlling stake in the company, no upward trajectory, just shared custody of his debt and a man still arguing with paperwork he'd signed himself. Professionally, he drifted. He freelanced for other contractors, taking smaller jobs under someone else's brand. His name moved from the front of proposals to the fine print. Vendors who once returned his calls immediately now asked for payment up front. Some declined to work with him at all, citing capacity issues with polite smiles that said everything. The informal blacklist didn't need explanation. Industries remember. His smear campaign lost momentum the same way it began, quietly. People who'd been inclined to believe his version ran into Mark at a luncheon, or Elaine at a conference, or me at an industry event. Someone mentioned paperwork. Someone else asked a careful question. Facts slipped into conversations not as defenses, but as context. The story adjusted. Not to make me a hero, just to make him less of the flawless victim he'd painted himself as. A mutual friend told me Daniel tried to start another serious relationship. The woman seemed interested until she did what most people do now. She Googled him. She found snippets of court documents, forum chatter, an article quoting phrases like forged signature and dissipation of assets. She said she's not signing anything she doesn't read, the friend told me. I smiled, small and grim, and said nothing. Sometimes I saw him in ordinary places, the grocery store, the hardware aisle, thinner, a little more hunched, no entourage, no audience. Once our eyes met across a parking lot. He started toward me, then hesitated, like he wasn't sure which version of me he'd get. After a moment, he turned away. We became silhouettes in each other's peripheral vision, familiar shapes without access. His collapse wasn't dramatic. There was no arrest, no headline, no sudden crash, loud enough to satisfy anyone craving spectacle. It was quieter than that, more precise. It was the logical consequence of years of entitlement meeting a wall of paper that didn't care how charming he was. Contracts don't respond to tone. Spreadsheets don't flinch. Signatures don't forget. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't toast to it or recount it for entertainment. I noticed it the way you notice a forecast coming true, expected, then fulfilled. Now I understand that karma doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it arrives as a series of smaller rooms, fewer choices, and a story that stops working once the audience learns how to read. The first time a client introduced me as the owner of Reeves Design and Build, I almost turned to see who he was talking about. My instinct was still to shrink, to step aside and let someone louder take credit. Then I realized he was looking directly at me, hand extended, waiting. I shook it, felt the weight of the moment settle, and thought, oh, it was always me. The business didn't transform overnight, but it changed in ways that felt deliberate and honest. We rebranded gently, quietly. Daniel's name disappeared from the front-facing materials, not erased in anger, but removed like a label that no longer fit. We leaned fully into Reeves Design and Build as a collaborative firm. The new website featured our team instead of a single face, our values instead of slogans, our transparent billing instead of mystique. Clients responded to that. Solid work spoke louder than bravado ever had. I kept my role balanced. I wasn't on job sites every day, breathing dust and giving orders for the sake of being seen. I signed checks, reviewed budgets, approved major decisions. I trusted the people who knew the work best to do it. In my home office, the trust binder sat on one shelf, vision boards on another. The smell of ink and paper no longer felt like a burden or a secret. It felt like possibility. A few months later, I moved out of the Maple Ridge house. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. I chose the city condo the trust had bought years earlier as a rental. My grandmother's old place, now renovated and waiting. Light poured through the big windows every morning, catching on bare floors and white walls. The sound of traffic replaced the heavy silence of the suburb. I furnished it slowly. A chair because I liked how it felt, not how it photographed. A table chosen for dinners, not meetings. Nothing selected to impress anyone I didn't invite. With Mark's and Elaine's help, I set up a small side consultancy. It started quietly, almost accidentally. One woman asking questions, then another. Workshops on reading your own documents, on spotting red flags in joint accounts, on what trusts are actually for when you inherit something and don't want it swallowed by someone else's ambition. I didn't tell them everything about my story. I didn't need to. I told them enough to make the lessons real. Some nights, after a long day, Hannah came over with wine. We'd sit on the floor because I hadn't decided on a couch yet, city lights flickering through the windows. She looked around once, thoughtful, then said, I forget sometimes that all of this was yours before it was his. I laughed softly. I did too. The truth landed gently, this time, without bitterness. It was bittersweet and freeing all at once. On my desk next to my laptop sat a small framed photo of my grandmother. In it, she stood in front of the old condo years before, arms crossed, half smiling, the original trust documents visible behind her on the table. She looked practical, prepared, like a woman who understood that love and protection weren't the same thing. I like to think she'd be proud, not because I won anything, not because someone else lost, but because I didn't let the thing she left me, her care, her foresight, be turned into a weapon against me. Today I understand that building a life isn't about starting from scratch. Sometimes it's about reclaiming what was always yours and finally using it the way it was meant to be used. The day Daniel left me for his lover and demanded a divorce felt like an ending I hadn't chosen. It landed without warning, like a door slammed behind me while I was still standing in the frame. I remember how small I felt that night, how the future narrowed to a single thought. How did I let this happen? The day he sat at that settlement table and finally understood who owned everything wasn't just his humiliation. It was my beginning. This morning, I sat at my kitchen table in the condo, sunlight spilling across the wood and warming my coffee mug. The city hummed faintly outside the window, traffic, footsteps, life moving forward. My laptop was open in front of me, not to court filings or damage control, but to a client's draft trust. I reviewed clauses, made notes, adjusted language to make protections clearer. My phone buzzed beside the mug. Elaine texted about a new referral. Hannah sent a meme that made me laugh out loud. A project manager messaged an update about a build finishing ahead of schedule. None of the messages asked me to justify myself. None of them asked me to shrink, to soften, to make someone else more comfortable at my own expense. That alone felt like proof of how far I'd come. I thought about the Julia who stood at the old kitchen island months ago, staring at Daniel's fair proposal where he kept the house, the business, the narrative. I remembered the smell of dinner gone cold, the way my hands trembled as I read terms designed to make me disappear politely. I thought about the Julia who later walked into the settlement room carrying a binder full of documents people had dismissed for years as boring. Somewhere between those two moments, something fundamental shifted. I stopped believing that love meant handing over every key. I stopped confusing patience with loyalty, silence with strength. Now I understand that ownership isn't just about whose name is on paper. It's about who takes responsibility, who pays attention, who asks questions when something feels off instead of explaining it away. I owned more than Daniel ever realized, not just in assets, but in insight. I had always seen clearly. I just let him narrate reality louder than I trusted myself. Daniel will probably keep telling his version of the story, that I blindsided him, that I set him up, that I took everything. Maybe he even believes it. That's his right. People cling to the stories that protect their pride. I don't argue with his version anymore. I don't need to. The trust documents exist. The court orders are filed. The ledgers balance. And my life, quiet, stable, expanding, tells the truth without raising its voice. If there was revenge in any of this, it wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't about destroying him or watching him fall. It was simpler than that. It was refusing to fund his destruction of me. It was choosing to use the power I already had to protect myself instead of protecting his ego. It was deciding that my future deserved more care than his image. I closed my laptop and stood, grabbing my keys from the counter. As I passed the refrigerator, I caught my reflection in the stainless steel, steady, awake, fully present. Not the abandoned wife he imagined leaving behind, not the woman scrambling to survive his choices, the owner he never bothered to understand. Today, I don't need him to know that to feel it. I know who owns my life now. That's enough.